The flight from Dallas to Denver had begun with the quiet hum of routine. Passengers settled into their seats, earbuds in, heads bowed over laptops, phones, or paperback novels. Flight attendants walked the aisle, distributing snacks and water with polite smiles, while the dull murmur of conversation filled the cabin. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed the wing in a golden haze, glinting across the aluminum, while the horizon stretched wide and unbroken, promising nothing but ordinary travel. For most, it was just another Tuesday flight, uneventful, unremarkable, the kind of journey they wouldn't remember in a week. Among them, in seat 14B, a young woman sat upright, shoulders squared yet relaxed. She appeared inconspicuous, as if she were blending into the mundane background of routine travel. Her dark hair fell straight, framing a face that was calm, almost blank, but there was a faint glimmer in her eyes, something alert, precise, controlled. Her hands rested on the armrests, one lightly clutching a worn leather backpack. No one in the surrounding seats noticed her at first. She was quiet, reserved, the kind of passenger people overlooked while scanning the cabin for familiar faces, uncooperative toddlers, or a window seat with the best view. Beneath her sweatshirt, a small glint of dog tags peeked from under the fabric, catching the light every so often as she adjusted her posture. She didn't fidget. She didn't sigh. She merely observed. Her eyes flicked to the flight attendants, methodically checking overhead bins, then to the passengers who were scrolling, talking, and sipping their coffee. Every movement, every expression registered in her mind, catalogued like a soldier on patrol. Years of discipline had trained her to notice details that others ignored. The way a pilot's wrist twitched slightly over the controls, the subtle pitch of engine hum, the slight quiver of the cabin's fuselage. For now, it was all ordinary. But that calm, that quiet observation, was preparing her for what was about to come. About 20 minutes into the flight, the plane shuddered violently. A sharp, unnatural jolt ran through the cabin, and the fluorescent overhead lights flickered. Coffee sloshed over the edges of cups, spilling onto the folded knees of nearby passengers. The murmuring hum of conversation turned into startled gasps. One man clutched the armrest so tightly his knuckles whitened. A mother grabbed her child, whispering reassurances that she didn't entirely believe herself. Even the flight attendants paused mid-step, eyebrows knitting in concern as the plane dipped slightly before righting itself. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the captain's voice over the intercom, calm yet tense. "We're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts." There was nothing extraordinary about turbulence. This was normal. But the passengers' collective tension lingered like a low hum. Few noticed 14B, the quiet girl, adjusting her backpack and straightening her posture. Her eyes had narrowed, scanning the wing outside, the gauges inside, the passengers' reactions. Something about the turbulence felt off. A second, sharper jolt rocked the aircraft. A panel rattled, spilling a few service items onto the floor. The captain's voice came back, strained this time. Folks, this is more serious than standard turbulence. If there's anyone on board with aviation experience, or who's flown a helicopter or military aircraft, please make yourself known immediately." A wave of murmured confusion swept through the cabin. Phones were raised to record the announcement. Passengers whispered to each other. "Pilot? Do you think he's serious? Flight attendant? Is this like a joke?" People glanced at each other nervously, the tension building in real time. No one moved, frozen in disbelief and fear. The flight attendant nearest 14B paused mid-step, her eyes scanning the aisle for anyone who could help. She reached the quiet girl, her face pale. "Ma'am, you have to please. He's asking for help," she urged. Riley Torres, as she was named, looked up slowly. There was no hesitation in her gaze, but there was the slightest exhale as she prepared herself. This was no ordinary day, and she was no ordinary passenger. "I'm Captain Riley Torres," she said calmly. "Apache pilot, U.S. Army, Fort Hood." Her voice was quiet, steady, but there was a steel edge to it that commanded attention. The flight attendant blinked. "The helicopter pilot?" Riley nodded. She slid past the crew and passengers, her backpack swinging lightly over one shoulder, and approached the cockpit curtain with the kind of authority that made others instinctively step aside. Around her, the passengers' whispers intensified. "Seat 14B. She's an Apache pilot? You mean military helicopter?" Eyes widened, phones were raised, and some passengers stared openly, their fear mixing with awe. The mother clutching her child lowered her gaze, as if the girl's presence somehow offered reassurance. Other passengers leaned slightly forward, craning to see what was happening behind the curtain. Riley paused for a moment, taking a deep, steadying breath. Her military training clicked into place, instincts sharpened over years of combat missions, long hours at Fort Hood, and countless simulations of crisis scenarios. Every muscle remembered, every thought measured, every decision weighted. She was calm, but inside, a mental checklist ran at lightning speed. Assess situation, check systems, identify threats, stabilize aircraft. She knew the stakes. A passenger plane, full of civilians, with a co-pilot slumped over the controls and a captain in distress, was now her responsibility. The flight attendant opened the cockpit door for her, hands trembling slightly. Riley slipped inside, closing the curtain behind her. The interior was cramped, gauges blinking frantically, warning lights flashing in red, and a low alarm tone filling the cabin. The co-pilot was slumped over the side panel, muttering incoherently, clearly semi-conscious. The captain's face was pale, jaw tight, eyes darting between the instruments. "We lost hydraulics," he admitted. "I can't stabilize her." Riley didn't hesitate. She slid into the right seat, her fingers brushing over controls she hadn't used in months. "I can handle this," she said calmly. Hands moving instinctively, she began adjusting trim, throttle, and pitch. It was a different machine than the Apache, but the principles remained. Precision, patience, instinct. She spoke softly to herself, muttering over flight controls as she assessed each gauge. Every movement, every vibration of the plane, every subtle change in altitude was catalogued, understood, and addressed. Meanwhile, the passengers were still frozen in fear. Some had noticed movement in the cockpit, whispers spreading like wildfire. "She's flying it," someone said, voice shaking. "The girl in 14B. She's actually flying." A collective exhale of disbelief mingled with cautious hope. Riley's mind focused, ignoring the noise, the panic, the adrenaline surge. She was in her element, now unexpected, dangerous, critical. But her mind was clear, her hands steady. She would fly this plane. She had no choice. Turbulence rocked the fuselage again, stronger this time, and alarms blared more urgently. Riley's voice filled the cockpit. "Keep nose level at 2 degrees. Adjust trim slowly. Don't fight it, work with it." The captain obeyed, relief flashing across his features. Outside, clouds swirled as the plane pitched and dipped, the wings slicing through gusts of wind. Riley's eyes scanned the horizon, mentally calculating altitude, distance, and trajectory. In that moment, the quiet girl from seat 14B was no longer just a passenger. She was a pilot, a soldier, a trained professional thrust into chaos. She was the line between disaster and survival, and she was ready. Riley's boots clicked against the narrow cockpit floor as she took her place beside the captain. The hum of the engines vibrated through the small space, mingling with the shrill alarm of warning lights. She took a steadying breath, feeling the familiar adrenaline kick in not fear, but laser-sharp focus. Years of military training had prepared her for life-and-death situations, for moments when hesitation could mean catastrophe. Yet flying a commercial jet with 173 lives at stake was a new kind of challenge. Her fingers hovered over the throttle, studying the instruments, reading the subtle hints of an aircraft in distress. "Co-pilot's out," the captain said, voice tight. "I can't keep her level. We've lost some hydraulic systems. She's fighting me." Riley's eyes flicked to the warning panel, scanning for the exact indicators: engine output, flap status, rudder responsiveness. "It's fine," she said firmly. "We'll stabilize her. Keep calm. I need you on radios." The captain swallowed hard, nodding. His hands flexed nervously on the yoke, ready to assist where he could, but trusting her to lead. Outside the cockpit, the plane shuddered violently. The overhead lights in the cabin flickered again, some passengers letting out startled cries. The flight attendant nearest Riley whispered, almost inaudibly, "Thank God it's you." Riley nodded without turning, her attention fixed entirely on the instruments and the tactile feel of the aircraft through her seat. Every vibration, every sound told her something. This plane was alive, and it needed her guidance. She reached for the throttle, adjusting it slightly, then eased the yoke to counter the subtle tilt of the wings. "We need to descend, but slowly. Flaps at 20. Reduce thrust by 5%, she instructed, her voice calm, precise, carrying authority that the captain unconsciously mirrored. Outside, the sky darkened, heavy clouds rolling in, adding turbulence to an already tense flight. Passengers gripped armrests, some closing eyes, some pressing foreheads against tray tables, others whispering hurried prayers. A mother clutched her sleeping child, her knuckles white. A businessman muttered numbers to himself, probably running calculations he didn't fully understand. Everyone in the cabin was aware, even vaguely, that something extraordinary was happening. The quiet girl in 1-4B once ignored, unnoticed, was now the center of their survival. Phones raised in shaky hands tried to capture the moment, but Riley's focus remained unbroken. She could feel the collective panic, and she fed off it like a soldier drawing energy from chaos. The captain glanced at her, eyes wide. You're calm," he said. "I don't know how you do this." Riley didn't smile. "Experience," she replied simply. Her mind shifted seamlessly between systems. Each control input, each adjustment, was like muscle memory. She imagined the Apache rotor blades, the desert sandstorms, the long hours hovering over hostile terrain with bullets ricocheting around her. It was the same principle: predict, stabilize, survive. The size of the aircraft was different, but the core instinct was identical. Suddenly, the plane lurched again, more violently than before. Riley gritted her teeth, adjusting the yoke, throttles, and flaps in a precise sequence. The cabin jolted, passengers screaming involuntarily. Coffee and water splashed across tray tables, soaking papers and electronics. The overhead bins rattled, some popping open with a loud clang, releasing a few scattered items into the aisle. A toddler began to cry. "It's okay," a nearby mother whispered, but her voice trembled as much as the plane. Riley's eyes scanned the altimeter, noting the descent rate. "Altitude stable at 26,000, she murmured to herself, running calculations in her head for the emergency landing ahead. She adjusted thrust again, slowly, carefully, while simultaneously coordinating with the captain on navigation and radios. "We need to make Colorado Springs," she said, tone clipped. "I need you to keep communicating with the TC. I've got this." The captain nodded, swallowing, finally trusting the young woman who had just appeared from seat 14B. In the cabin, murmurs grew into whispers of awe. Passengers were noticing movement near the cockpit curtain, straining to understand who could possibly manage the plane. "Is that a military pilot?" someone whispered. A man in a business suit turned to his colleague, disbelief in his eyes. "That's the quiet girl in 14B? You're telling me she's flying the plane?" A colleague shook his head. "I think we're about to find out." Riley's hands moved with precision. She had trained for this type of adrenaline-induced focus. Everything she had learned in the Army clicked into place. She ran through a mental checklist: stabilize the plane, communicate with the tower, monitor fuel, prepare for landing, protect passengers. Her mind ignored the chaos in the cabin, the flashing alarms, the terrified faces. All that existed was her, the aircraft, and the critical task ahead. The plane tilted again, and Riley made a split-second decision to adjust the flaps further, counter the sway, and throttle down slightly. Her movements were fluid, almost dance-like, and the aircraft responded, leveling gradually. "We're stabilizing," she said, voice calm but firm. The captain exhaled, eyes wide with relief, while the co-pilot slumped even further, unconscious. "You've got this," he said, almost in disbelief. Riley nodded, her mind already moving ahead to the landing plan. She called out over the intercom, keeping her voice steady for the passengers' sake. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing turbulence and a mechanical issue. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts. We have someone on board handling the situation. Stay calm." She didn't say more. She didn't need to. The presence of authority, of calm precision, had a subtle but palpable effect on the cabin. Fear remained, but hope now threaded through it. Riley's thoughts flashed to the Apache helicopters she had flown in combat zones, dodging enemy fire, navigating sandstorms, executing precision missions. The principles were identical: control, predict, anticipate, act. The difference now was the stakes. Instead of enemy combatants, it was 173 lives, civilians who had no training, no preparation for this level of danger. She accepted the responsibility instinctively. The wind outside howled, battering the fuselage with gusts. Clouds whipped across the windows, streaking the horizon with gray, turbulent energy. Riley adjusted her inputs again, keeping the plane steady, running scenarios for descent and landing. She signaled the captain to handle radio communications, giving her full attention to flight dynamics. The plane responded, inches at a time, controlled by her steady hands and unwavering focus. The passengers began to notice the control. The plane's violent sway decreased slightly. Gasps turned to murmurs of awe. Mothers gripped children, but whispered reassurances. Businessmen lowered trembling hands from phones. Eyes turned toward 14B, trying to understand who could possibly be managing the aircraft. Riley's presence was quiet, understated, but undeniably commanding. She didn't look for attention, didn't acknowledge the fear around her. She simply worked, precise, professional, ready. Suddenly, another jolt shook the plane, stronger this time. Riley adjusted instantly, throttling down one engine, adjusting the trim, compensating for minor hydraulic loss. "Hold steady," she muttered, almost to herself, as the cabin jolted once more. Passengers screamed involuntarily, gripping their seats. A beverage spilled on a laptop. Papers flew into the aisle. But Riley remained focused. One misstep could be fatal, but she had trained for this. Years of military missions, long nights in simulators, and countless emergency drills had all prepared her for exactly this moment. The captain glanced at her, disbelief evident. "You're calm. More than anyone I've ever seen," he admitted. Riley didn't respond. Calm was necessary. Words could wait. Every second counted, and every adjustment mattered. The plane's instruments, her instinct, and her training were all she relied on now. She was the quiet girl from 14B no longer. She was the pilot. Hours or what felt like hours in the intensity of the moment of turbulence, alarms and rapid calculation passed, though in reality, only minutes had elapsed. Riley ran through contingency after contingency, monitoring systems, stabilizing the aircraft, preparing mentally for the descent ahead. The passengers remained oblivious to the precision at work, seeing only the sudden drops, jolts, and the tension in the cabin. Few realized the calm authority, managing everything behind the cockpit curtain. Finally, Riley took a deep breath and began preparing for controlled descent. She adjusted the altitude, throttles, and flaps methodically, coordinating with the captain and monitoring every gauge. The plane slowly stabilized, the violent rocking subsiding just enough to hint at control. The cabin murmured in surprise. Passengers began to whisper again, curiosity mixing with awe. She was in command now, quiet but undeniable, a force moving decisively against the chaos. Riley Torres, the quiet girl from seat 14B, had transformed a routine flight into a test of skill, instinct, and courage. She had taken control of a passenger jet mid-crisis, and the lives of 173 souls now rested in her hands. The cockpit was tense, a small metal cocoon rattling through the sky as Riley Torres sat with her hands firmly gripping the controls. Outside, clouds swirled like an angry sea, the plane shuddering under gusts of wind that slammed against the fuselage. She could hear the faint hum of the engines, the alarm lights flashing like a heartbeat in the dim cockpit light, and the distant screams and gasps of terrified passengers beyond the curtain. This wasn't just turbulence, it was chaos in human form, and she was its countermeasure. The captain, seated to her left, glanced at her with an expression bordering between awe and disbelief. "I don't know how you're doing this," he admitted. "I've never seen anyone calm, precise like you." Riley didn't answer. Words would only break the rhythm of her focus. Every instrument, every dial, every vibration of the plane told her something, and she listened like a seasoned pilot in the cockpit of a combat helicopter. This was life or death, and distraction could mean catastrophe. Her eyes flicked between the altimeter, engine gauges, and the artificial horizon. The co-pilot was slumped unconscious over the controls, leaving her fully responsible for keeping the plane level, stabilizing altitude, and preparing for the emergency landing that loomed ahead. Her hands moved in precise sequences, adjusting the throttle, yoke, and flaps with confidence, anticipating the plane's responses before they happened. Muscle memory, combat training, and years of experience converged. "Altitude's dropping faster than expected," the captain muttered, voice tight. "We might need to adjust our approach." Riley's eyes scanned the instruments. "I see it. I've got control. We'll stabilize first, then calculate approach. Don't interfere unless I ask." The captain nodded, realizing that in this moment, she was in command. Outside the cockpit, passengers were starting to notice subtle changes. The violent jerking of the plane lessened slightly, though their fear remained palpable. One man whispered, "Is someone flying this thing?" His companion shook his head, eyes wide. "I don't know. I think, yes. That girl, 14B, she's doing it." Across the aisle, mothers clutched their children, trying to mask the quivering of their own hands. Some passengers filmed the moment with phones, though none could comprehend the full gravity of the situation. Riley's mind was elsewhere. She thought of Fort Hood, of Apache helicopters, and desert missions, dodging hostile fire, executing precision maneuvers under pressure. It was the same core principle: control, predict, anticipate, act. She could feel the aircraft respond under her touch. Unlike combat zones, Here she had no backup, no emergency medics nearby, just the lives of civilians who had no preparation for this. Responsibility weighed heavily, but she welcomed it. Another jolt rattled the cabin, harder than before. Riley's fingers reacted instantly. Flaps adjusted, throttle fine-tuned, rudder corrected. The plane leveled slightly, and the alarms decreased in frequency. She spoke softly to herself, running mental checklists: systems, fuel, hydraulics, instruments, communications. She kept the voice calm, measured. Panic could spread through the cockpit as easily as through the cabin. She would not allow it. The captain leaned closer. "I can't believe how calm you are. Do you even feel fear?" Riley's eyes flicked to him, unflinching. "Fear is a tool," she said simply. "It focuses you. But right now, we can't act on fear. We act on knowledge, training, and instinct." The captain exhaled sharply, admiration evident, though tension still gripped him. Beyond the curtain, the cabin shuddered. Some passengers whispered prayers, others sobbed quietly. Riley could hear it all: the child crying in row 12, the man muttering numbers under his breath, the mother trying desperately to soothe her young son. They had no idea that the quiet passenger in 14B had just stepped into the cockpit and assumed control of their fate. They didn't know she had spent years flying in combat zones, executing impossible maneuvers, hovering inches above desert terrain under fire. They only felt the effects, the plane's slow but noticeable stabilization. Riley scanned her instruments again. Hydraulic pressure was low, but manageable. Engine performance was stable. The altitude was still uneven, but correctable. She adjusted the yoke incrementally, flaps descending smoothly, and the plane responded, leveling gradually. Sweat ran down her temple, but her hands remained steady. Years of high-stress combat had conditioned her to channel adrenaline into precision, not panic. Every decision she made was measured, deliberate, and informed by experience. The captain broke the silence again. "We have about 20 minutes before we reach Colorado Springs. The weather's deteriorating fast. Do you think we can land?" Riley's eyes flicked to him briefly. "We can. We will. But we need full focus. I'll handle the plane. You handle communications. We can do this." He nodded, gripping the yoke lightly, relieved to finally have clear leadership in the cockpit. As the minutes ticked by, Riley executed micro-adjustments with surgical precision. Each jolt of turbulence was countered immediately. The plane swayed slightly, then corrected. Passengers noticed a subtle steadiness in the cabin, though fear lingered. Murmurs of disbelief spread. "She's flying it," someone whispered again. "She's actually flying it." Phones recorded shaky videos, faces pressed against windows, passengers exchanging anxious, awed glances. Riley's mind raced through contingencies for landing. She visualized the runway at Colorado Springs, calculating approach angles, speed, wind correction, and landing gear deployment. She adjusted throttles, corrected pitch, and coordinated with the captain. Every maneuver was precise. There was no room for error. Outside, clouds churned violently, gusts of wind thrashing the fuselage. Inside, warning lights flashed intermittently, reminding her of the mechanical issues still unresolved. She paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. "We're approaching the descent point," she said quietly. "Gear down, flaps 25, throttle steady. Watch my signals." The captain obeyed instantly, marveling at her authority. Riley adjusted the plane incrementally, calculating every possible variable: weight distribution, wind, hydraulic performance, and passenger safety. She visualized the landing strip as if it were a target on a combat mission. Nothing was left to chance. A sudden, violent gust rocked the plane again, stronger than any before. Riley's hands reacted instinctively. She adjusted rudder, flaps, and throttles in perfect synchronization. The plane leveled, the violent swaying reduced. Sweat ran down her brow, but her movements remained precise. She whispered under her breath, a mantra of focus. Predict, stabilize, control, survive. Every muscle, every neuron, every ounce of experience converged on that single moment. Back in the cabin, passengers were now fully aware something extraordinary was happening. Whispers rose into quiet murmurs of awe. Mothers gripped children, trying to hide relief behind trembling hands. Businessmen leaned forward, wide-eyed, unable to comprehend what was unfolding. Someone gasped quietly. "She's saving us," another murmured. "The quiet girl in 14B is saving us all." Riley ignored the whispers. She couldn't afford distraction. She couldn't afford failure. As the plane descended toward Colorado Springs, the storm outside intensified. Wind howled against the fuselage. Rain streaked the windows, lightning illuminating the clouds. Riley adjusted throttle, yoke, and flaps with pinpoint accuracy. The plane's descent was gradual, controlled, precise, a dance against chaos. She kept the aircraft level, monitoring every gauge, calculating every movement. The co-pilot remained unconscious. The captain followed her lead. Passengers clung to hope, as fragile as it was, trusting someone they had once overlooked. For Riley, time became a blur. Seconds stretched and contracted with intensity. Every jolt, every gust, every flicker of an alarm demanded instant calculation and reaction. She relied entirely on instinct, knowledge, and experience. Her training with Apache helicopters, hovering under enemy fire, executing impossible maneuvers, now translated to controlling a commercial aircraft in extreme conditions. The size, the weight, the systems were different, but the principles were identical. Finally, she reached the point where she could begin lining up for the runway approach. Gear deployed, flaps set, altitude stabilized. "We're approaching the airfield," she said, voice steady, calm. The captain nodded, awe still present, realizing fully that this young woman, once unnoticed, had taken control and turned a disaster into a manageable situation. The passengers remained unaware of the intricate, life-saving work being done behind the cockpit curtain. They only saw the plane steady, the turbulence gradually easing, the faint light of Colorado Springs Airport beginning to pierce the storm clouds. They had survived the first phase of the crisis, but the most dangerous moments, the landing, were still ahead. Riley Torres, however, was ready. Riley Torres adjusted her headset, her eyes scanning the instruments with laser focus. Outside, the storm intensified. Thick clouds churned like a living entity, slamming rain against the fuselage and gusts that threatened to jolt the aircraft off course. Lightning forked across the sky, momentarily illuminating the wings, the engines, and the terrified faces of passengers beyond the cockpit curtain. Every flash was a reminder. There was no room for error. This was no simulation. This was real. Lives, 173 of them, were resting entirely in her hands. The plane shuddered violently, a gust hitting the port side. Riley reacted instinctively, nudging the yoke, adjusting throttle, correcting rudder. The aircraft slowly righted itself. Beside her, the captain muttered under his breath, eyes wide. "I've never seen someone react this fast," he admitted, voice tight with tension. Riley didn't answer. There was no time for commentary. Every second mattered, every adjustment critical. "Altitude stable at 20,000, she reported quietly. Her voice was calm, measured, yet carried the weight of command. Outside, the storm's howl grew louder, a physical presence pressing against the aircraft. Rain streaked windows. Wind slammed the fuselage, and the plane rocked as if it were a living creature resisting control. Riley's hands danced over the controls with the precision of a concert pianist, each movement anticipating the plane's responses before they occurred. The passengers' panic was palpable. Mothers clutched children, whispered prayers trembling in their lips. A businessman muttered figures to himself, probably calculating odds that couldn't possibly be relevant. Others pressed faces against windows, trying to comprehend the scale of the storm. Yet some, noticing subtle steadiness, began to whisper among themselves, "She's stabilizing it." Another voice added, almost in awe, "The quiet girl in 14B. She's doing it. She's actually flying." None could see the complexity behind the curtain, the life and death decisions being made in milliseconds. Riley's mind raced through calculations. Speed, altitude, descent angle, wind correction, flap adjustment, gear deployment, every element needed precise timing. She coordinated with the captain, who handled radio communications, allowing her to focus solely on controlling the aircraft. Each gust of wind was countered, each turbulence spike neutralized. She visualized the landing strip at Colorado Springs, broken into coordinates and variables, running simulations in real time. Years of Apache helicopter missions, hovering in hostile zones, dodging obstacles and gunfire, translated seamlessly into this moment of high-stakes precision. Suddenly, the plane jolted again. Lightning flashed, illuminating the cockpit and casting long shadows across the controls. Alarms chimed sharply, signaling minor hydraulic issues. Riley's hands reacted instinctively, adjusting flaps and throttle, nudging the rudder to counter the sway. "Gear down, flaps 30, she instructed softly. The captain followed, clearly relieved to have a plan under control. Outside, the storm battered the wings, gusts threatening lateral stability. Riley's eyes were unwavering, her mind a machine of focus, calculating responses faster than the wind could strike. Back in the cabin, passengers were gripping seats, hearts hammering. Coffee and water had spilled. Overhead bins rattled. Some whispered prayers, others cried softly. A man in row 12 held a trembling child close to his chest. "She's saving us," he murmured, voice trembling. "The girl in 14B. She's saving us." Around them, murmurs of disbelief and awe circulated. For most, it was impossible to imagine how someone so young, so quiet, could command a plane under this kind of chaos. Riley's mind moved to the landing plan. The runway lights were faintly visible in the storm ahead, the storm clouds slicing visibility into patches. She adjusted throttle, yoke, and flaps incrementally, keeping the plane steady. The descent had to be gradual, yet fast enough to make the airfield. She visualized the landing strip as a series of coordinates, calculating wind shear, slope, and speed. The aircraft responded, inch by inch, level by level. Each adjustment brought them closer to the ground, closer to safety. The storm's intensity increased, wind gusts slamming the fuselage, rain hitting with unrelenting force. Lightning illuminated the wings and engines in sharp white flashes. The cabin shuddered violently. Passengers screamed, clutched children, and prayed. Some were aware only of the turbulence, unaware of the calm, precise hands guiding them through it. Riley remained focused, hands steady, mind calculating variables in real time. Years of high-stakes training, simulations, and combat experience had prepared her for this exact blend of chaos and responsibility. "Approach stabilized," she said, voice calm but firm. "Prepare for final descent. Keep communications clear." The captain nodded, still awed by her composure. Riley's eyes flicked across instruments. Airspeed stable, altitude decreasing at correct rate, flaps set correctly, landing gear deployed. The plane shuddered again, and she made minor adjustments to throttle and yoke. Outside, The runway lights were brighter now, cutting through the gray storm clouds. It was close, but they were on course. Another violent gust hit. Riley reacted instantly, nudging the controls, compensating for the shift. Alarms blared briefly, indicating minor pressure fluctuations. "Ignore non-critical warnings," she muttered, voice low but commanding. The plane leveled again, responding perfectly to her input. The captain exhaled sharply, leaning back in his seat. The co-pilot remained unconscious, leaving Riley fully responsible for the aircraft. The weight of that responsibility pressed on her, but instead of panic, it fueled her precision. In the cabin, the mood was tense but changing. Whispers of awe circulated as passengers noticed the plane's gradual stabilization. Some filmed shaky videos on their phones, though none could comprehend the skill behind the curtain. A woman clutched her child tightly, whispering, "She's amazing. She's saving us all." A man muttered, "I don't know who she is, but thank God for her." The storm outside continued, but inside, hope began threading through fear. Riley adjusted throttles, yoke, and flaps with micro-precision. The plane was steady, but the storm was relentless. She visualized the approach, aligning with the runway, accounting for gusts, wind shear, and visibility. Each movement was calculated, deliberate. Her mind recalled Apache missions, hovering inches from danger, dodging fire. The scale was different here, but the principle remained. Control, anticipate, act. One mistake could be fatal. She refused to make mistakes. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the cockpit. Rain struck with the force of a hammer against the fuselage. The plane swayed slightly, then stabilized under her guidance. "We're lined up," she said softly. "Steady approach. Maintain altitude. Adjust throttle gradually." The captain mirrored her instructions, eyes wide with awe. Outside, runway lights gleamed through sheets of rain, a beacon of hope amidst the storm. The passengers remained tense, unaware of the full precision required to get them safely to the ground. Riley's hands never wavered. She nudged, adjusted, countered, and guided the plane with military precision. Each second brought them closer to the runway, each adjustment crucial. The storm howled, wind gusts lashed, rain battered, but the plane responded flawlessly to her commands. In the cabin, passengers whispered, prayed, and watched, hearts pounding. Some still didn't realize that the quiet girl in 14B had become the captain, the pilot, and the savior of everyone on board. Finally, she brought the plane within visual range of the runway. "We're almost there," she said softly, voice calm. The captain nodded, communication clear, instructions precise. The plane descended slowly, steadily, flaps fully deployed, landing gear locked. The runway lights grew brighter with each passing second. She felt the plane respond perfectly to her control, inch by inch, as if it were an extension of her own body. And then, the final stretch, the most critical phase. Rain streaked the windshield, wind gusted unpredictably, yet Riley's hands never wavered. Instruments flickered briefly under the strain, but she adjusted instantly. Each decision was deliberate, each action precise. This was the culmination of her skill, training, and focus. Every passenger, every life depended on her steady hands and clear mind. The runway loomed ahead, cutting through storm and darkness. Riley guided the aircraft forward, throttling and nudging gently, the plane responding with obedience. Cabin screams had quieted into tense silence, punctuated by soft prayers and whispered breaths. The storm remained fierce, but control had been restored. Riley Torres, once the quiet girl in 14B, was now the pilot in command, guiding 173 lives toward safety. The runway at Colorado Springs appeared like a fragile thread of light through the storm. glowing faintly through sheets of rain and swirling clouds. Riley Torres' eyes narrowed, tracking every marker, every flashing beacon, every instrument in the cockpit. The plane lurched slightly under the force of a gust, and her hands moved instantly, nudging the yoke, adjusting throttle, flaps, and rudder with flawless precision. Each movement was calculated, a dance of survival between metal and storm. Gear confirmed down. Flaps at 35. Airspeed steady, she said quietly, almost to herself. The captain glanced at her, awe and tension etched into his face. "You really have this," he said, though his voice trembled slightly. Riley didn't answer. She had no time for reassurance. Every second, every inch mattered. The lives of 173 passengers rested entirely on her hands, her experience, her calm precision. Outside, the storm battered the fuselage with relentless force. Rain pounded the windows, wind gusted from unpredictable angles, and lightning illuminated the wings in blinding flashes. The plane shuddered violently, the turbulence threatening to unseat even the most experienced. Riley adjusted instantly, her hands a blur across the controls. Micro-adjustments in throttle, yoke, and rudder compensated for the violent gusts. Sweat ran down her temple, but her hands remained steady. Years of combat training had prepared her for high-pressure decisions. This was no different. Only civilian lives hung in the balance. The passengers were acutely aware of the tension. Mothers clutched children tightly, whispering reassurances that were more hope than fact. Businessmen leaned forward, eyes wide, their white-knuckled grip on armrests betraying fear. The overhead bins rattled with every jolt, coffee cups toppled, and phones captured shaky footage. Whispers of awe began to circulate. She's actually flying the plane," one voice murmured. "The quiet girl in 14B is saving us." Nobody fully understood the precision behind the curtain, but they felt it in the slow stabilization, the reduction of violent jolts. Riley's mind raced through calculations. Descent angle, landing speed, wind shear, flare timing, touchdown force, everything had to be precise. One misstep could send the plane into catastrophe. She adjusted throttle carefully, lowered the nose fractionally, and guided the plane onto the proper glide path. Each movement was fluid, instinctive, a result of thousands of hours in cockpits under pressure, dodging sandstorms, gunfire, and deadly maneuvers. The size and weight were different, but the principles remained identical. Control, anticipation, action. "Final approach," Riley said, voice calm but firm. The captain mirrored her instructions on communications. "Wind gusts are strong, stay steady," he added. Outside, rain lashed the fuselage, and turbulence jostled the aircraft. The runway lights, faint but visible, cut through the storm like a beacon. Each second brought them closer to solid ground. Each second demanded precision. Riley's eyes tracked instruments and horizon simultaneously. Flaps fully deployed, landing gear locked, airspeed steady. She had done this countless times in simulations, but never with real lives at stake in such chaos. A sudden gust hit violently, threatening to push the plane off course. Riley reacted instantly, nudging the yoke, adjusting rudder, trimming flaps slightly, and modulating throttle. The aircraft responded almost obediently, inching back toward alignment. The captain exhaled sharply, realizing just how much precision and reflex was required. He had never seen such calm under extreme pressure. Riley's entire training, her life experience, and her instinct converged in this single moment. Failure was not an option. Back in the cabin, fear and awe intertwined. Passengers held hands, whispered prayers, and pressed foreheads against windows. The plane's movements were violent enough to alarm them, but there was also a strange steadiness, a rhythm that suggested control. A mother clutched her child tightly. "She's saving us," she whispered. The girl in 14B. "She's saving us." The hum of alarms and the roar of engines filled the cabin, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, tension shifted toward hope. Riley's mind ran contingency after contingency. Engine failure, hydraulic loss, gust compensation, flare adjustment, touchdown force, braking distance. Every parameter had to be accounted for. She nudged the throttle slightly, adjusting for wind, then fine-tuned the yoke. The runway lights grew brighter with each passing second. She could see the wet surface, the reflective sheen of rain on asphalt. The final, critical seconds approached. Any mistake now could be catastrophic. The storm roared, wind slamming against the fuselage, rain pelting the windows, but the aircraft responded to her precise control. She felt the plane inch downward, approaching the runway with calculated speed and alignment. Outside, the runway approached at an almost terrifying pace. Inside, the passengers were tense, silent, clinging to hope. Some filmed the approach, though their shaky hands betrayed their fear. The plane was responding perfectly, but the storm remained relentless. "Throttle back," Riley said quietly, signaling the flare. She lifted the nose fractionally, preparing the aircraft for touchdown. The captain watched, awe evident, knowing the critical moment was upon them. Rain streaked the windshield, the engines hummed, and turbulence threatened to jolt the plane. Riley adjusted flaps and rudder, stabilizing the descent. Each adjustment was fluid, precise. One wrong move could send the aircraft skidding, hydroplaning, or worse. She refused to allow that. The landing gear touched asphalt with a sharp, jarring impact. The tires screamed against wet runway. Sparks flew briefly as the fuselage trembled under the sudden contact. Riley kept the nose slightly raised, modulating throttle to absorb the shock. The plane bounced lightly, then settled. Relief surged in the cockpit, but Riley's hands remained steady. She applied brakes carefully, reverse thrust, and rudder corrections to maintain alignment. The aircraft slowly decelerated, inching down the runway under her controlled command. The passengers erupted into gasps and cheers, though many still clutched armrests or children, not fully believing they had survived. Mothers whispered, "We're safe. She saved us." Businessmen exchanged stunned glances. Phones recorded shaky footage. Nobody fully grasped the precision and heroism that had just played out behind the cockpit curtain. Riley Torres, once the quiet girl in 14B, had guided them through a life-threatening storm and delivered the aircraft safely to solid ground. She gradually brought the plane to a complete stop, holding the brakes while ensuring alignment on the runway. Smoke from the wet asphalt and friction rose, but the plane was stable. The storm continued, but the immediate danger had passed. Riley exhaled sharply, removing her headset briefly, aware of the adrenaline coursing through her body. The captain turned to her, voice thick with relief. You saved all of us." "I can't believe it." Riley shook her head slightly. "Just another landing," she said softly, though her lips curled into a small, tired smile. Emergency crews rushed forward as planned, their lights cutting through the storm. They assessed the plane and passengers, confirming that everyone was unharmed. Paramedics checked on the co-pilot, who was gradually regaining consciousness. Reporters, alerted by air traffic control, began gathering by the tarmac, capturing images and videos of the wet, exhausted passengers disembarking. Few could comprehend that the quiet passenger in seat 14B had not only stabilized the aircraft, but piloted it to safety. Passengers exited the plane slowly, some hugging loved ones tightly, some shaking with relief, some turning to the storm above the runway in disbelief. The murmurs grew louder. "Did you see her? She was in the cockpit the whole time." The quiet girl in 14B. She saved us all. An Apache pilot on a commercial flight, unbelievable. Phones recorded shaky footage, capturing both awe and fear. The story was already beginning to spread. Riley remained calm in the cockpit as passengers disembarked, allowing the captain and emergency crew to coordinate further. She removed her headset, massaging her temples slightly. Adrenaline still surged, but focus remained. This was not her first life-saving moment, but it would be one she remembered vividly. She glanced at the co-pilot, who was now conscious, and the captain, who offered a faint, grateful smile. Outside the aircraft, the storm raged, but Riley's actions had transformed chaos into control, panic into relief, fear into awe. She had guided 173 lives through one of the most harrowing storms imaginable, using skill, instinct, and courage honed over years of military service. The quiet girl from 14 Bytes was no longer quiet, no longer unnoticed. She had become the center of a story that would travel far beyond the tarmac, beyond the city, beyond the storm. The roar of the storm outside had diminished slightly, leaving only the soft patter of rain against the tarmac, mingling with the distant wail of emergency sirens. Passengers slowly began to disembark, their faces pale, hands trembling, eyes wide with disbelief. Some held children tightly. Others hugged spouses or friends, still too shocked to fully comprehend the ordeal they had just survived. The atmosphere was thick with relief, awe, and a lingering hum of fear, the kind that lingered even after the plane's wheels had touched the wet asphalt. Whispers began almost immediately. "Did you see her? She was flying the plane. The girl in 14B, the quiet one, she's the hero. An Apache pilot? On a commercial flight? Impossible." Phones recorded shaky videos, capturing awe and relief, the murmurs of disbelief spreading like wildfire. News crews, alerted by air traffic control, started arriving, their cameras lighting the scene, capturing the exhausted, rain-soaked passengers as they stumbled into safety. Emergency responders moved swiftly. Fire trucks and ambulances were positioned, ready for any lingering danger, but their tense energy eased as they saw passengers exiting calmly, albeit shaken. Paramedics checked vital signs, offering blankets and warm drinks. Several passengers collapsed into relief, overwhelmed by emotion, while others maintained a stoic exterior, still processing the crisis. The storm continued its assault, but the danger had passed, leaving only the wet asphalt and the echoes of chaos behind. Riley remained in the cockpit for a moment longer, her hands resting on the controls, taking a deep, steadying breath. Adrenaline still surged, though her body began the slow transition back to normal. She removed her headset, letting her dark hair fall forward, dampened by rain and sweat. Her eyes flicked toward the co-pilot, now conscious and blinking against the dim cockpit light. He looked at her with a mix of relief and awe, his words caught somewhere between disbelief and gratitude. You saved us," he finally managed to say, voice trembling. Riley offered a small, weary nod. "Just doing my job," she replied softly. She had flown countless missions in Apache helicopters, faced hostile forces and life-threatening situations countless times, but each scenario had been different. Yet the principle remained unchanged: precision, focus, calm under pressure. Here, it had meant guiding 173 civilians safely through a storm they didn't understand and couldn't control. The captain leaned back in his seat, running a hand down his face. "I don't know how to thank you," he admitted. "I've never seen someone take control like that. Calm, precise. You saved everyone." Riley's lips curved faintly. "It's what I'm trained to do," she said quietly, though she didn't expect gratitude. For her, action was its own reward. Recognition wasn't necessary. Lives had been saved. That was enough. Outside, reporters began to crowd the tarmac, cameras flashing, microphones thrust toward the aircraft. Passengers were guided toward buses, wrapped in blankets, and offered hot drinks and reassurance. Many turned to whisper among themselves, talking about the quiet girl in 14B. Nobody could stop recording, commenting, or speculating. The storm might have driven the flight into chaos, but Riley's skill had turned it into a story that would circulate far beyond Colorado Springs. One reporter managed to approach the aircraft, voice carrying over the noise of the emergency crews. "We understand there was a passenger who played a crucial role in guiding the plane to safety. Can anyone confirm?" Passengers looked at each other, nodding and murmuring. "Yes." "Seat 14B," a woman whispered, gripping her child tightly. "She's an Apache pilot. She flew the plane." Phones lifted, capturing shaky footage of Riley still seated in the cockpit, her focus momentarily uninterrupted by the cameras. Riley emerged from the cockpit, walking down the narrow stairs to the tarmac, shoulders squared, but expression calm and unassuming. Emergency personnel moved aside, letting her pass, sensing the gravity of the moment. Passengers, many still trembling, watched her approach. Some clutched their children, others whispered, "Thank you. Thank you so much." A few business travelers extended hands, trying to offer gratitude that words could barely express. Riley nodded politely, accepting gestures quietly, aware of her role, but uninterested in the spotlight. Paramedics offered her a blanket, which she draped over her damp shoulders, though she hardly felt the chill. Her training had taught her to focus in extreme conditions, and though her body now registered exhaustion, her mind remained alert. She glanced at the passengers, noting their expressions: relief, awe, disbelief, gratitude. She had saved them, and they were alive. That alone was enough. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions, cameras flashing. "How did you stay so calm? Were you trained for this? Can you describe what it felt like to land a commercial jet in a storm?" Riley's gaze remained steady. She answered softly, matter-of-factly. "Experience and training. Focus on the task at hand. The rest doesn't matter when lives are at stake." Her voice carried authority, but lacked any trace of self-aggrandizement. This was about survival, not fame. Passengers gathered nearby, some filming, some talking quietly amongst themselves. "She's a real hero," one man whispered. "The quiet girl we never noticed. She's the reason we're alive." A mother nodded, gripping her child, tears running silently. "I don't know how she did it," another whispered, voice trembling. "But she saved us all." Riley's presence was quiet, understated, but undeniably commanding. She didn't need applause. The recognition was implicit in the safety of everyone around her. Airport staff and emergency crews began coordinating the next steps, moving passengers to shelter, assessing the aircraft for any further damage, and ensuring the storm wouldn't cause additional issues. All the while, Riley remained calm, letting others handle the logistics, offering only quiet guidance when necessary. Her work in the cockpit had ended, but her presence still carried the weight of authority, experience, and quiet heroism. Soon, the storm began to ease, wind and rain lessening, though the tarmac remained slick. Passengers were led to buses, some still in disbelief, whispering about the Apache pilot who had saved them. News crews captured every moment, eager to tell the story of the quiet girl in 14B who had turned crisis into survival. Riley watched from a distance, her expression calm, her mind already moving to the next steps, the next tasks. Security personnel and airline officials approached, asking questions, verifying details, and documenting the events. Passengers offered statements, all consistent. A young woman, seat 14B, had taken control in a crisis and guided the plane safely. Riley answered succinctly, offering technical details when asked, but avoiding embellishment. She didn't need accolades. The truth was enough. She had done what needed to be done, and everyone was alive. The passengers, slowly processing their survival, began sharing stories with each other, pointing out where Riley had sat, what she had done, how calm and precise she had been. Social media posts began circulating. Cameras captured her quiet heroism, and the story of the Apache pilot passenger began spreading far beyond Colorado Springs. For the passengers, the realization dawned. The quiet girl in 14B, the one they had overlooked, dismissed, or ignored, was the reason they were alive. Riley Torres, Apache pilot, soldier, and now civilian hero, quietly observed the scene. Emergency crews coordinated, passengers moved, and news crews filmed. She remained unassuming, calm, and composed, even as the storm had passed and adrenaline slowly ebbed. The heroics of the flight weren't for recognition. They were for the lives she had saved, and for the peace that slowly began to settle over 173 grateful passengers. By the early evening, the storm had mostly passed, leaving a slick, rain-soaked tarmac glinting under the airport lights. Passengers were escorted to a nearby terminal, their faces still pale but alive with relief. News crews had already set up outside, cameras flashing, microphones thrust toward the gathering crowd. The story of the quiet girl in 14B had begun to circulate, spreading faster than any storm could. Eyewitnesses shared their awe. A passenger, seemingly ordinary, had taken control of a commercial jet mid-flight and guided it safely through one of the fiercest storms Colorado Springs had seen in years. Riley Torres remained in the background, calm and composed despite the growing media attention. She had donned a dry jacket over her uniform, a blanket draped loosely across her shoulders. Her dark hair, damp from the storm, clung to her forehead. She exhaled slowly, grounding herself as adrenaline slowly ebbed from her system. She had saved lives today, not for recognition, not for praise, but because it was her responsibility. The awareness that hundreds of eyes now sought her words, her story, was unfamiliar yet inevitable. Reporters pushed forward, shouting questions in quick succession. How did you stay so calm under such pressure? Were you trained for this kind of situation? Can you describe what it felt like to save 173 lives? Riley answered succinctly, her voice steady, her demeanor composed. Experience and training, she said softly. You focus on what matters, the task at hand. Panic is dangerous. Control, precision, and responsibility guide you. That's what you rely on in moments like this. She avoided personal accolades, redirecting the conversation to the passengers, the crew, and the importance of teamwork. Meanwhile, passengers gathered around her, some tearful, some still clutching blankets and children. A mother whispered, "You saved my daughter. I can't thank you enough." Another passenger extended a hand, voice trembling. "I didn't even know who you were. Thank you. You kept us alive." Riley accepted their gratitude with quiet nods, humbled but composed. For her, this was not a moment of personal triumph. It was confirmation that training, focus, and calm could turn chaos into survival. The airport authorities had already begun documenting every detail. They approached Riley for a formal debriefing, noting flight data, passenger statements, and emergency protocols. Her actions were meticulously recorded, how she stabilized the aircraft, coordinated with the captain, and guided it safely to the runway. Each decision was analyzed and praised as textbook execution under extreme conditions. Pilots, engineers, and aviation specialists would later reference this flight as a case study in crisis management and skill under pressure. News outlets rapidly began broadcasting footage of the storm, the plane, and Riley's quiet, composed presence on the tarmac. Social media buzzed with excitement. Clips from passengers' phones showed her emerging from the cockpit, calm and unassuming, as emergency crews and passengers moved around her. Eyewitness accounts described her as focused, confident, and unshakable, a trained soldier, seamlessly adapting to civilian crisis. Hashtags began trending. Hashtag Apache pilot saves plane. Hashtag seat 14 BHE row. Hashtag Riley Torres. The story spread nationwide within hours, capturing the imagination of a public desperate for real-life heroism. Riley's phone, previously off during the flight, buzzed incessantly with messages from colleagues, friends, and family. She didn't respond immediately. Her attention remained on the passengers and officials. Yet she couldn't ignore the growing awareness that her actions were being recognized. Messages of admiration, congratulations, and gratitude poured in. Former military colleagues praised her composure and instincts. Friends marveled at her calm demeanor. Media outlets requested interviews. The quiet girl from seat 14B had suddenly become a national symbol of courage and professionalism. Despite the attention, Riley remained grounded. She moved methodically, ensuring passengers were accounted for. Emergency crews had what they needed, and journalists could conduct their interviews without disrupting the process. She answered questions honestly, avoiding dramatization. "There's nothing extraordinary about doing your job well," she said. "Focus on training, preparation, and teamwork. That's what saves lives." Her humility only amplified the awe surrounding her, reinforcing the image of a skilled, composed professional whose courage had become unmistakably evident. As word of her actions spread, airline executives arrived to formally commend her. The captain personally approached, shaking her hand firmly. "I've flown for decades," he admitted, voice tight with emotion. "I've never seen anyone pilot or passenger handle a crisis with this level of precision. You saved lives today, Riley. You saved us all." She nodded, acknowledging the praise without seeking it. For her, the real reward was the lives she had protected, the gratitude she had witnessed, and the knowledge that preparation and composure had prevented tragedy. The terminal slowly emptied as passengers were processed, transported to hotels or connections. Yet journalists remained, eager for more details. Riley answered calmly, explaining technical aspects when necessary, clarifying the sequence of events, and emphasizing the teamwork that made survival possible. She highlighted the role of the captain, the co-pilot, and the flight attendants. Every answer reflected her humility, yet underscored the skill and composure required to navigate extreme crisis. A public reaction was immediate. Social media exploded with admiration. News cycles highlighted her story, and commentators debated the rarity of such heroism. Aviation forums dissected her maneuvers with precision. Military communities praised her instinctive crisis management, and civilians marveled at her calm presence. In homes across the country, families watched the news and whispered awestruck comments. "She's incredible," one viewer said. "The quiet girl on a plane. An Apache pilot saving everyone mid-flight. Unreal." Even as recognition grew, Riley remained reflective. She understood the weight of the day, not the fame, but the responsibility. She thought of the passengers, their terror, and the trust they had unknowingly placed in her. She considered the storm, the mechanical failures, and the countless split-second decisions that had prevented disaster. Pride was present, yes, but it was quiet and tempered by responsibility. Heroism, she understood, wasn't performance, it was action when it mattered most. By nightfall, the airport began returning to normal operations. The storm had passed completely, leaving wet tarmac and residual chaos from the emergency response. Riley, finally free from immediate duties, allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She leaned against the fuselage of the aircraft, watching emergency lights flicker and crews tidy the runway. Her mind replayed the flight, the storm, and the controlled landing. Relief mixed with exhaustion, the culmination of hours of intense focus, now replaced by calm. Even in quiet reflection, the impact of the day was undeniable. Passengers, staff, and emergency crews had witnessed something extraordinary. A quiet girl, once overlooked, had demonstrated unmatched courage, skill, and composure under extreme pressure. News cameras, social media clips, and eyewitness accounts would preserve the story, ensuring her actions were recognized far beyond Colorado Springs. For Riley, the significance was profound but personal. Lives were saved, chaos was contained, and competence had prevailed over panic. As she prepared to leave the tarmac, Riley glanced at the passengers gathering their belongings, some waving quietly in her direction, eyes wide with gratitude. She nodded, acknowledging them with humility. The storm, the crisis, and the danger were over, but the memory would linger for everyone involved: the passengers who survived, the crew who witnessed precision under pressure, and Riley herself, who had once again confirmed that training, courage, and calm determination could turn disaster into survival. The quiet girl from seat 14B had become more than a passenger. She was now a symbol of heroism, precision, and unassuming courage. And while the world would celebrate her skill, she remained grounded in the simple truth she had always known. Heroism is not about recognition, it's about responsibility, preparation, and the ability to act when every second counts. Days after the storm, Colorado Springs and the nation were still buzzing about the miraculous flight. News outlets replayed footage of the storm-tossed plane, passengers' tearful reactions, and Riley Torres emerging from the cockpit, calm and composed amidst chaos. Social media amplified her story exponentially. Hashtags like hashtag Seat 14BHE hashtag Apache pilot saves lives, and hashtag Riley Torres trended worldwide. News anchors described her precision, calmness, and bravery, praising the passenger-turned-hero who had transformed panic into survival. Airline executives formally recognized Riley, inviting her to the company headquarters. Their gratitude was extensive: commendations, letters of appreciation, and a plaque inscribed with her name, honoring her quick thinking and composure. The captain personally addressed her, shaking her hand firmly. "I've flown for decades, and I've never seen such calm, precise control in a crisis. You saved lives today, Riley. You saved all of us." Her response was quiet, modest, almost dismissive of the accolades. "I just did what needed to be done," she said, the words reflecting a humility only a true professional could possess. The airline's press release called her an exemplary figure of courage and composure in the face of extreme adversity. Aviation communities worldwide analyzed her landing, praising her execution as textbook-perfect crisis management. Former military colleagues shared interviews, marveling at how Riley's years of Apache pilot training translated seamlessly to controlling a commercial aircraft under unprecedented circumstances. Her heroism became a case study in crisis leadership, decision-making, and composure under pressure, inspiring pilots, soldiers, and civilians alike. Government officials reached out as well. The FAA requested a full report, eager to understand the technical aspects of her intervention. Senators and representatives called to commend her bravery. Invitations for interviews, panels, and speaking engagements flooded her mailbox. Yet, despite all the attention, Riley remained focused on the core truth. She had acted out of responsibility, training, and duty, not for recognition or fame. The heroism had been in the action, not the accolades. For Riley personally, the days following the incident were a whirlwind of interviews, media appearances, and public attention. She spoke at aviation conventions, military forums, and educational institutions, emphasizing the importance of preparation, focus, and calm decision-making. Heroism is not about accolades, she explained during one speech. It's about recognizing responsibility, staying calm under pressure, and taking decisive action when lives are at stake. Her words resonated with audiences, from cadets to corporate executives, reinforcing that courage often appears quietly, without fanfare, until circumstances demand it. Passengers continued to share their stories, often attributing their survival to Riley's calm and decisive control. Some returned to the airport to meet her, offering personal thanks. Mothers with children whispered heartfelt gratitude. Business travelers expressed awe and admiration. Each encounter reminded Riley that her actions had tangible consequences, real lives preserved, because she remained focused and disciplined. These encounters, while emotionally intense, reaffirmed her belief in responsibility and action over recognition. Local communities began celebrating her quietly but meaningfully. Schools invited her to speak, emphasizing resilience and courage to students. Aviation museums and organizations highlighted her story as an example of applied skill and leadership. Social media continued to circulate video clips, interviews, and passenger testimonies. People across the country found inspiration in the quiet, composed figure who had transformed a moment of panic into a story of survival and heroism. Riley's story became a touchstone, a reminder that ordinary individuals, when prepared and focused, could achieve extraordinary feats. Eventually, official recognition followed. The airline awarded her a medal for bravery and composure. State officials organized a ceremony highlighting her achievements, attended by passengers, emergency crews, and aviation professionals. Senators and local leaders praised her for courage and responsibility, framing her actions as exemplary for citizens nationwide. Even international aviation organizations contacted her, recognizing that her skill transcended borders and would serve as a model for crisis management training worldwide. Yet, amidst the accolades and recognition, Riley remained grounded. She knew that the true measure of her actions was not fame or awards, but the lives saved. She quietly reflected on the storm, the chaos, and the choices made in the cockpit. She thought about the passengers' fear, the crew's reliance, and the calm that had allowed her to transform panic into action. Every decision had counted. Every calculation had mattered. Every second had demanded focus. The heroism had not been in dramatics, but in precise, disciplined execution. Riley's family, initially unaware of the full scale of her actions, embraced her quietly but with pride. Friends and colleagues acknowledged the courage and skill that she had displayed, though Riley herself remained humble, almost reluctant to dwell on the public attention. To her, the true story was simple. Training, preparation, focus, and calm could transform impossible situations into survivable ones. Fame was irrelevant. Responsibility was everything. The incident also inspired a broader conversation about women in aviation and the military. Articles highlighted her experience as an Apache pilot and her composure in the face of extreme stress. Discussions about preparation, skill, and resilience surged, with Riley as the focal point and inspiring examples. Young women, in particular, found in her a model of strength, intelligence, and courage, demonstrating that leadership and heroism are defined by actions, not assumptions or appearances. Months later, the passengers of that flight continued to remember the quiet girl who had saved them. Reunion stories appeared in news outlets, social media posts tagged Riley, and personal testimonies highlighted the awe and gratitude that lingered. Seat 14B, they called her, their whispered phrase carrying both reverence and disbelief. For Riley, these accounts were bittersweet reminders of what had transpired: fear, chaos, life and death decisions, but also the lasting impact of calm, skilled action in moments of crisis. As the story settled into history, Riley returned to her regular life, though she could no longer be unnoticed. Her heroism had permanently altered the perception of the quiet Apache pilot in Seat 14B schools. Aviation forums and military institutions continued to reference her story as a shining example of skill, courage, and composure. Interviews, documentaries, and articles ensured that her actions would inspire future generations. And yet, Riley remained true to herself, quietly emphasizing that heroism is not self-promotion. It is responsibility, preparation, and precise action when it matters most. In the end, the quiet girl in Seat 14B had done what few could. She had transformed panic into control, chaos into order, and fear into survival. She had shown that courage is not loud or performative. It is disciplined, calculated, and grounded in skill. Riley Torres' story would forever stand as a testament to the power of preparation, the importance of calm under pressure, and the extraordinary outcomes that can emerge when ordinary people rise to meet extraordinary circumstances. The nation remembered her not just for the flight, the storm, or the accolades, but for the quiet heroism that had saved 173 lives. And as Riley returned to her life, she carried the satisfaction of knowing that she had fulfilled the highest calling of skill and courage, to act decisively when it mattered most, to save lives and to inspire those who would one day face their own storms.